This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is The World Today. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi, and these are your top stories. Top diplomats of the U.S. and Russia meet in Sweden amid rising tensions over Ukraine. The WHO set to give an update as the Omicron variant spreads. And Japan drops a ban on flight bookings that were imposed over Omicron. In our top story, the U.S. and South Korea are planning to update their contingency war plans against the DPRK. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is visiting Seoul, where he has met with his South Korean counterpart Soo Wook. Austin says Pyongyang's weapons program is a threat to regional security and has called on the DPRK to engage in dialogue, saying diplomacy is the best approach. Washington has also pledged to maintain its current troop level of 28,500 in South Korea. South Korea says the two sides have made progress towards being able to transfer Wartime Combined Forces Command to Seoul. Well, meanwhile, U.S. and Russian diplomats are meeting in Sweden today amid rising tensions over Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov will hold talks on the sidelines of an OSCE meeting. The talks come amid rising tensions over Russia's alleged military buildup on its border with Ukraine. Moscow is accusing Kiev of amassing tens of thousands of troops in eastern Ukraine. Blinken has warned against Russian aggression in the region at a recent NATO meeting. Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia shares an unprecedentedly high level of relations with China. Putin made these remarks at the Russia Calling Investment Forum on Tuesday. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said China and Russia are more than allies.
There are a few countries who seek to strengthen their military alliances and build a variety of ideologies. However, China and Russia insist on developing partnerships without targeting third parties. This relationship is injecting stability into these complicated international situations. China and Russia are more than allies, and this partnership has provided a positive notion for promoting world peace and development.
Well, let's turn now to the coronavirus pandemic. More than 20 countries and regions around the world are reporting cases of the Omicron variant. It has quickly become the dominant strain in South Africa, the first country to report infections. The United States confirmed a case Monday after a California resident arrived from South Africa. In Europe, France is the latest country to report a case. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has said they expect to learn more about the new variant within days.
California is the first state to identify a case of the Omicron variant of coronavirus in the United States. The governor said there's no reason to panic, but people should remain vigilant.
This individual has not been hospitalized. The individuals that this individual has come into contact with have not tested positive yet to our knowledge, and we are hopeful of full recovery and expect nothing less based upon what we've learned. Again,
California is already ramping up efforts to contain it, with plans to increase testing at airports, receiving the only travelers still allowed to arrive from southern Africa, mainly returning U.S. citizens. Similar measures are being adopted at other international hubs across the country.
Currently, CDC is expanding a surveillance program with Express Check to JFK, San Francisco, Newark, and Atlanta airports, four of the busiest international airports in the country. This program allows for increased COVID testing for national arrivals.
The looming threat of Omicron comes as the city of Los Angeles this week began enforcing one of the country's strictest vaccine mandates. Indoor establishments like restaurants, bars, coffee shops, and gyms could face fines up to $5,000 for failing to verify that customers are vaccinated before allowing them to enter.
Yeah, I feel more safety because if most people they are vaccinated, people who comes here in the restaurant, they also feel more safe because they know that those people that are inside eating, they are vaccinated. So
a big question now is how effective is our biggest weapon, COVID-19 vaccines, against this new variant? The head of drug maker Moderna said on Tuesday none of the existing COVID-19 vaccines is likely to be as effective against Omicron as they have been against the Delta variant. But to what extent exactly, we'll only know when enough data is collected. Nearly a third of California's counties had more hospitalized COVID patients last week than they did at the same time last year. It may be too early to predict the impact of Omicron on the holiday season, but even in California, with vaccination rates higher than the national average, the state seems hardly prepared for another wave of COVID-19 infections. And officials are calling on the public to practice greater precaution. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Well, the WHO is currently holding a press briefing on the Omicron variant. Dr. Abdul Salam Gay, who is the Regional Emergency Director for Africa, is addressing the latest information. Let's listen in.
This window of opportunity, act swiftly to ramp up measures to track, detect, control, and spread of the Omicron variant. At WHO, we are urging countries to increase genomic sequencing, ensure that laboratories have sufficient equipment and staff to accelerate analysis, and that screening of point of entry to enhance so that cases are detected early and appropriate clinical care provided. We are also working closely with countries to step up response to this new variant. In South Africa, where WHO has already a team working in genomic sequencing, we are deploying a surge team in Gauteng province to support surveillance and contact tracing, as other interventions such as infection prevention and treatment measure. In Botswana, we are providing technical assistance to boost the production and distribution of medical oxygen. The organization is also mobilizing $12 million to support critical response activities in countries across the region for the next 3 months. Turning to COVID-19 vaccination, it is almost 1 year since the world's first COVID-19 shot was given. Yet, Africa has made...
Well, that there was the WHO's Regional Emergency Director for Africa, Dr. Abdul Salam Gay, talking about this new variant, calling on countries to engage in genome sequencing and tracking and tracing, as well as the support that WHO is providing countries like South Africa and Botswana. Well, let's turn to the EU now. The head of the European Union says mandatory vaccinations should be considered. Here's more from Trent Murray.
For a really long time, Europe has focused on trying to convince people to get their shot rather than compel them. But it seems that thinking may be starting to change as they look at all options to try and help those health systems which are facing a serious strain. Ursula von der Leyen saying that all options do need to remain on the table. She noted that around 1/3 of the EU's population still remain unvaccinated.
I think it is understandable and appropriate to lead this discussion now, how we can encourage and potentially think about mandatory vaccination within the European Union. This needs discussion. This needs a common approach, but it is a discussion that I think has to be led.
And this call from von der Leyen comes just within hours, really, of incoming Chancellor Olaf Scholz making a similar statement in German media that he too is open here to bringing in mandatory vaccinations. I think clearly there is some sort of alignment between Brussels and Berlin with this new approach, but it of course does remain to be seen whether other EU countries will be open to taking what will inevitably be such a controversial decision.
Meanwhile, scientists believe they've found the trigger that leads to extremely rare blood clots after the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine is administered. UK media are reporting that scientists in Cardiff and the US have shown how a protein in blood is attracted to a key component of the vaccine. They think this kicks off a chain reaction involving the immune system that can culminate in dangerous clots. The vaccine is thought to have saved about 1 million lives from COVID, but concerns about rare blood clots have shaped how the vaccine has been used and received around the world. Now, Japan has walked back on a blanket travel ban imposed over the Omicron variant. Last week, the government told airlines not to accept new inbound bookings starting December, following an outcry from citizens and officials. It's now been said they've asked airlines to accommodate the needs of Japanese hoping to return home. Tokyo says it's reverted to allowing a maximum of 3,500 inbound plane passengers per day. Well, China says it's speeding up work on COVID vaccines to boost efficacy against the Omicron variant. A top expert of the Joint Prevention and Control Mechanism of the State Council, Zhang Zhongwei, said in an interview that local developers are also working on new vaccines specifically against Omicron. Echoing the World Health Organization, Zhang says current vaccines remain effective in reducing severe disease and death. Studies are also underway to understand the potential impact of the Omicron variant on existing countermeasures, including vaccines. Well, in other news, New Zealand is deploying peacekeepers to the crisis-hit Solomon Islands. They'll be joining an international mission aimed at maintaining security. The crisis erupted last week when protests over government policies turned violent, fueled by poverty, unemployment and inter-island rivalries. Owen Poland reports.
Several days of rioting in the Solomon Islands has left 3 people dead and dozens of businesses looted and burned. So it's obviously an extremely volatile situation there. In fact, only yesterday the head of the Solomon Islands Chamber of Commerce warned that the worst is yet to come, and he says the business community is bracing itself for more trouble. Now, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says that she's deeply concerned by the civil unrest and the rioting in Honiara. An initial assessment team of 15 New Zealand Defence Force personnel are leaving for the Solomons today, and they'll be followed by a larger team of 50 military and police officers this coming weekend. The New Zealand contingent will join troops and police from Australia, Papua New Guinea and Fiji as part of an international peacekeeping mission, which will work alongside the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force to help restore law and order. Prime Minister Ardern says that every deployment brings risks and challenges, but New Zealand has vast experience in the Pacific region, and the police and military are among some of the most highly skilled when it comes to de-escalating conflict. The New Zealand Police also have a long-standing relationship with the Solomon Islands Police Force, so the extra personnel will have the task of engaging with communities and providing public reassurance. At this stage, it's not known how long the peacekeeping mission will last, but the New Zealand government says that it's committed to playing its part to uphold regional security and support the Solomon Islands through what is a very difficult time.
Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching and see you shortly.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The African Union and the UN decried travel bans against African countries, calling them unfair and ineffective. Ethiopian government forces announced the recapture of the UN World Heritage Site Lalibela as the AU calls for a ceasefire. And with resources diverted to the fight against COVID-19, South Africa pushes to get HIV treatment back on track. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program. In business, unemployment in South Africa hits a new record high. And in sport, African teams in a perfect start at the 2021 FIFA Arab Cup in Qatar. In your top story, heads of the United Nations and the African Union Commission have decried the issuance of travel bans imposed on southern African states due to the identification of the new Omicron variant. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for the use of alternative solutions, while the AUC chairperson Musa Faki Mahamat says southern Africa should not be punished for information sharing.
The people of Africa cannot be blamed for the immorally low level of vaccinations available to them, nor should they be collectively punished for identifying and sharing crucial science and health information with the world. With a virus that is truly borderless, travel restrictions that isolate any one country or region are not only deeply unfair and punitive, they are ineffective. We have the instruments to have safe travel. Let's use those instruments to avoid this kind of, allow me to say, travel apartheid.
Malheureusement, moins de 6%. Unfortunately, under 6% of Africans are currently vaccinated at a time when the rest of the world vaccination rates are perhaps 10 times higher. We can see there is a certain degree of stigma reigning in this regard. Because we've been transparent regarding the new Omicron variant, that has meant that the Southern African region has been punished.
Well, Ghana has confirmed that it has detected cases of the Omicron variant among passengers who arrived in the country 10 days ago. The announcement comes amid reports that the new COVID variant may have been present in many other countries much earlier than previously thought.
Through the robust testing at the Kotoka International Airport, Ghana has detected the Omicron variant already. And the cases have come mainly from Nigeria and South Africa. The very first case that was detected through our sequencing was on the 21st of November. That's the very first time we saw the Omicron in Ghana.
As long as the COVID-19 continues to circulate, the more opportunity it has to change form or mutate. The only way to slow down this virus from mutating is by having as many people as possible vaccinated and by following public health measures.
Well, let's turn now to the latest on the conflict in Ethiopia. The country's government says it's taken back control of several small towns near Addis Ababa from the Tigrayan fighters. The government also announced its forces were marching towards the city of Sokoto in the north, but rebels are denying those claims. Let's bring in our correspondent Girum Chala. He's been following developments on the war front and joins us now from Addis. Girum, government reporting that it's recaptured a number of key sites, including the World Heritage region of Lalibela, but the TPLF refuting those claims. Talk us through this discrepancy. Exactly how many towns are still in the hands of the rebels, and why is the government so confident that this fight will end soon?
So, first of all, to answer from the final question, why the confidence has this war, why the government has this war end as soon as possible, is because, as you know, the head of state of the country, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, is on the war front. He is dedicated to finish the war as soon as possible. And the Ethiopian National Defense Force, all armed forces, including special force from Amhara, Afar, and other regional states, the militia, are under his command at the moment. And experts tell you that's why we are seeing results, and quickly. The second one is there are now about 16 to 20 towns and locations freed since the Prime Minister went to the war front about 10-11 days ago. And these are now confirmed by authorities, both from the Ethiopian government side or the army commanders themselves, including the important city of Lalibela. This is a historic site for the UNESCO, as Lalibela is also religiously important for Ethiopia. Ethiopian army is now saying that it's advancing to other locations, important locations. TPLF is still, however, to answer your second question, still, however, in control of most strategic locations. Cities of Waldia, Kombolcha, and also Dese are in the hands of the force. The Afar regional state, on the other hand, is still, by the way, free of the rebel force. As you've said, TPLF is saying that these are false claims, and they have actually retreated from these locations for strategic purposes, and they will control them if they want to. This is a statement. It was released by the military commander of the TPLF. But in general terms, we can confirm, and this is according to the government, that cities including Lalibela are freed and the Ethiopian army is advancing.
Well, indeed, and of course, it seems that the military effort is in full swing at the moment. On the other hand, the African Union Commission chairperson, Musi Faki Mahamat, is still calling for an urgent ceasefire. Do stay with us, Girum, but first, let's listen to what the AUC chair has had to say.
We continue to talk to both sides, but unfortunately, the fighting on the ground continues. We have noted in recent days that perhaps stability is beginning to reign on the front, but we do have deep concerns, in line with the United Nations, about the absolute necessity of a ceasefire. Humanitarian aid must reach all those who have suffered from this conflict, and we absolutely need to resolve these problems through political discussions and dialogue.
Well, there was the AU Commission chairperson, Musi Faki Mahamat, earnestly calling for a ceasefire. Girum, is there any hope that this could still happen?
Well, the call from the African Union is something that has been persistent, and Olusegun Obasanjo, former Nigerian president, who is envoy for the Eastern African region and also in charge of perhaps any possible negotiations, peaceful end of the war in Ethiopia, has been attempting these things, going to Mekele back and forth, and also speaking Ethiopian authorities, including the Prime Minister himself. The United States is making the same call. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi also expressed his will and intention that China is in support of any internal domestic solution for this war to end, and which is supposed to be peacefully. Unfortunately, however, there is no result that we can report at the moment, or there are no scheduled meetings in this regard for any possible roundtable discussions, peaceful resolution of the conflict. One thing, though, we can say that the Prime Minister's office yesterday was saying that the government is still up for any conversation between them and the TPLF, but there is no equaling these parties. This is an elected government. They are rebel groups, and there are preconditions for the government to sit down with them. So unfortunately, for now, there is no peaceful negotiation that we can report, and war has continued. The government is determined under Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to perhaps stop the war by lowering TPLF, no threat for the nation.
Right, so no sign of talks on the horizon, something that, of course, worries many other countries who have pulled their citizens out of Ethiopia. Talk us through what the mood is like in Addis Ababa for those that remain.
Well, Addis Ababa, the rest of the country, remain under a state of emergency. As we have reported repeatedly, however, we don't see any change in town. Life continues. People are going to their normal activities. There are no curfews. The number of searches by police of cars and people has lowered significantly over the past 2 weeks, for instance. Regional states, including the Oromia and other regional states, of course, in the Afar, Amhara, Sahara, things still are fragile as war is continuing. But in the other regional states, the same situation is happening. It is calm, it is peaceful, people are not complaining of the activities, but the state of emergency still exists. The government expects people to comply. People are in groups, rounding towns and securing their localities. So, Lindy, we can tell you that life is normal here in Addis Ababa.
All right, a relatively uneasy calm perhaps in Addis Ababa. Thank you so much, Girum Chala, joining us there live. You are watching Africa Live on CGTN. Here's what's still to come. With resources diverted to the fight against COVID-19, South Africa pushes to get HIV treatment back on track.
Once the lockdown happened, all the gyms were instructed to shut down.
Nobody could have foreseen what COVID-19 brought with it. Businesses were not prepared.
Technology had to really play a big part. We had to think of being able to social distance with your client, but still be able to train them. Let's go. Let's go.
We're going to go to what people call the new normal, and it will never be the same as what it was before.
South Africa is trying to get its antiretroviral program back on track. The country has the highest number of people living with HIV in the world. Testing and treatment have been severely hampered over the past 20 months, with resources being diverted to fighting COVID-19. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
South Africa has around 8.2 million people living with HIV. It's made steady progress towards having 90% of HIV-positive people on therapy. This worsened through the COVID-19 pandemic.
We implemented many additional efforts to reach patients, all the way to actually contacting them and in certain instances even delivering their medicines by parcels or by pharmacy lockers so that they could collect them at their convenience. South Africa has approximately 12.8% of the population infected with HIV. Of those, we have diagnosed and are following around 4.6 to 4.8 million HIV patients.
Stigma around HIV and the fear of COVID-19 infection has deterred patients from visiting clinics to keep up with appointments and therapy.
They're scared. They fear for their lives, and then when it comes to vaccine, they were also scared because they don't know of the counter effect of vaccine with their chronic medication. We need to encourage them to realize that HIV is still there, and if you are not on medication, people, they still get sick, and some they even die.
There's also been a concerning drop in tuberculosis testing, which is closely linked to HIV and is one of South Africa's leading causes of death.
And we are very worried about that because, in fact, we need to not lose the ground that we have gained in the region over the last 3 to 4 years in reducing TB incidence. Now, social distancing and masking may help to also reduce the transmission of tuberculosis, but indeed it is obviously concerning that we're not getting the TB diagnoses made.
Furthermore, the World Health Organization has warned of increasing resistance to old ARV therapy. South Africa and its neighbors are transitioning to new treatment, but that too was hampered by COVID-19.
The country and the region is moving to a dolutegravir-based 3-drug therapy, the newest 3-drug treatment regimen, the most highly prescribed first-line treatment across the globe, including in the US and Europe. Malawi and Zambia are leading the way, but indeed South Africa did have an interruption in the switching during the COVID period. We are now catching up.
South Africa has a battle on its hands. Untreated HIV-positive people are at a greater risk of severe COVID-19 infection if they are not vaccinated. The country is on the cusp of a fourth COVID-19 wave. Hospitals are filling up, and it's likely to once again impact on critical health services. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Libya has revived sea transport with Turkey after 40 years. The first passenger vessel has been released from the Libyan port of Misrata. It's heading to Turkey's coastal city of Izmir. The journey is expected to take 48 hours and the ferry will return on December 7th. No international ferries have docked in Libya for 25 years. Travel links have been disrupted since the 2011 uprising that ousted former leader Muammar Gaddafi. Libyan authorities say they've secured more deals to launch links with Egypt and Tunisia. Air travel has also resumed since a ceasefire late last year between the nation's main rival camps.
We are here at the official opening of the Misrata Marine Terminal and the inauguration of the marine line between Misrata and Izmir as the first passenger trip in 25 years. We are looking forward during the coming period to a number of other trips. We have approvals for Alexandria and Tunisia.
After a break of 40 or 50 years, Libya has returned to sailing the sea with this ship. This is incredible.
South Sudan's government says its relationship with China is growing from strength to strength. This comes as Chinese leaders this week met with Africa's political, military and civil society elites in Dakar, Senegal, for the 8th gathering of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. It's aimed at building stronger ties. CGTN's Patrick Oyet has more.
As leaders from China and Africa meet in Senegal, South Sudan's government says it is building stronger ties with Beijing.
China has supported a lot of projects to us. The Juba International Airport, other activities inside Juba town. During the cantonment area and security arrangement, China have helped. Even recently, with the current flood, China is also gave support of 15,000 metric tons of rice. They are also supporting even the IDPs that has come with the unfortunate situation of the flood in our country.
China is the biggest investor in South Sudan's oil sector. It is also involved in road construction, building a major road that will connect South Sudan to Sudan.
China has similarities with South Sudan. As we speak, they are still developing countries. And in 1970s and 60s and in 1940s as well, they were, I can say they were down. Maybe they were very poor, not even like South Sudan. But today, look at them. This is an opportunity that we can learn that very great model from China.
There's actually a lot of things whereby Chinese is doing to us South Sudanese, of which we as the citizens of South Sudan, we are happy of that. And also I call on Chinese people to continue with the kind of support that they normally offer to us as South Sudanese. Because what they normally offer to us is of a great opportunity to us as the young nation.
Beijing also takes South Sudanese students to study in higher institutions of learning in China.
China is now promising to undertake poverty reduction and agricultural projects for Africa. It aims to send 500 agricultural experts to the continent. South Sudan says it hopes to benefit from the agriculture development project. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Meanwhile, African leaders continue to react to a speech delivered by Chinese President Xi Jinping during the just concluded Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. Chipoka Mulenge, the Zambian Minister for Trade and Industry, has hailed China's commitment to help the continent build production capacity for vaccines.
It is very good news where the Chinese president has said we need to help Africa set up industries that will manufacture vaccines. If we can have industries in this country and have human capital trained, equipped with the skill and the ability to manufacture the vaccines, then Africa will be able to stand on its own, maintain its own facilities, manage itself, and continue to train more Africans by themselves. So this is a step that the Chinese president has taken in the right direction.
Well, here in Kenya, over 2 million people in almost half the country's 47 counties are facing food insecurity. Though the short rains have begun in parts of the country, regions are still grappling with the effects of a prolonged drought period. Well, Kirsten Yabwa has more insights on the situation.
At the beginning of September 2021, President Uhuru Kenyatta declared drought a national disaster in Kenya. The 2020 short rains, which were experienced between October to December, and the 2021 long rains had been poor, especially across the country's arid and semi-arid regions. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimated that over 2 million people would be in need of food aid by November. Kenya's National Drought Management Authority noted that the drought had led to deteriorating conditions of vegetation, increased distances to water sources, worsening livestock conditions, reduced milk production, and increased number of children at risk of malnutrition. Kenya is prone to drought because only about 20% of the country receives adequate regular rainfall. The country's drought management system uses 5 drought early warning phases categorized as normal, alert, alarm, emergency, and recovery. Out of 47 counties, by November, 8 counties were in the alarm drought phase. Climate change is the main driver of the erratic and recurring droughts and has been partly attributed to the recent locust outbreaks in East Africa. The short rains have begun in parts of the country, and the amount of rain received will determine whether the conditions in the affected counties will improve, enabling farmers to reap from their farms and pastoralists to sell their herds again. We traveled to the country's northern region, and here are some more insights. The bubble of beans boiling on the stove is a welcome sound in this homestead. It means today's meal is guaranteed. For months, Marsabit, a county in Kenya's expansive northern region, has been ravaged by drought, and this situation has led to food insecurity. The meal 25-year-old Arbi Ali is preparing will feed her 3 children tonight. Nobody knows if there will be something to eat tomorrow.
Since the drought started, we've faced so many problems. The animals have no food and we have no money. We often ask our neighbors for food or take food items on credit from the shop.
Arbi's husband is away, hiding the last of the family's goods. It is a situation that has built up over months. Across the country, 2.5 million people are facing hunger. People in Kenya's northern region say the area hasn't received substantial rainfall over the last 3 years. Climate change has increased the frequency and severity of droughts in the region. When he was younger, Ali Omar and his family fetched water from this water pan, but it has since dried up. This water pan was dug up in the year 1987, and in the decade since, locals say that they have only ever seen it dry up completely twice, this being the second time. And now the land is parched, the animals are thirsty, and their livelihoods are threatened, and locals say there seems to be no reprieve in sight.
The population here has since grown, and even if it were to rain, the water would be finished so fast because so many people need it.
The National Drought Management Authority predicted that people in the arid north and coastal parts of the country would need food aid due to poor rains between March and May this year. The crisis has been worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. President Uhuru Kenyatta has declared the drought a national disaster and promised comprehensive mitigation measures. Now, about once a month, government representatives deliver food rations. These are part of wider efforts to help the most affected people.
Disabled are given some funds after 2 months. The old age is the same. Then there's a hunger safety net program where government is assisting the community.
But at best, these efforts are just like a drop in a sea of increasing need. Every day, women line up at the local borehole for water. They don't believe the water is safe for human consumption, but it keeps the thirst at bay, keeps them alive for another day. And even though in some parts of the country it has already begun to rain, in Marsabit, the clear blue skies tell a different story, and another day ends as it began, hot, dusty and hungry. Wilkes Anyabwa, CGTN, Marsabit, Kenya.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
The presidents of South Africa and Nigeria have called for the lifting of travel restrictions on flights to and from South Africa and a number of other African countries over the Omicron variant of the coronavirus. They were speaking in Nigeria, where South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is on a state visit. They also committed to stronger ties between their countries in the areas of trade, people-to-people relations, education, science and security, among others.
As African countries, we are standing united against the imposition of arbitrary and discriminatory restrictions that are not only unscientific, but counterproductive in the long run. Indeed, the leaders of Côte d'Ivoire, where we are traveling to later today, as well as the leaders of Ghana and Senegal, have also expressed their dissatisfaction with the travel ban against South Africa and our sister countries in Southern Africa. This is a global pandemic, and overcoming it requires that we collaborate and work together as a collective. The resulting damage to this travel ban to the economies of the countries affected will be considerable and long-lasting. So I want to use this opportunity to once again call on the countries who have imposed this ban to reverse their decisions, whether they are in the northern, more developed economies or in other parts of our continent and elsewhere. Of the many areas of cooperation explored during this BNC was Nigeria and South Africa working to build resilience in our respective health systems and around our shared health priorities.
Today has witnessed the signing of new memoranda of understanding between Nigeria and South Africa in diverse areas, including youth development, women and child empowerment, and political consultations. Critical areas that will lead to increased people-to-people contact. Existing memorandums of understanding signed during previous binational commission meetings were also reviewed. These include memorandums of understanding on military cooperation, power, cooperation in the field of geology, mining and mineral processing, oil and gas, and several others. Today, we also jointly launched the Nigeria-South Africa Youth Dialogue, another veritable tool for interaction among our youth with the aim of creating shared values and aspirations.
South Africa's unemployment crisis is worsening. Statistics South Africa has released the third quarter labour force survey, and it shows unemployment at a new high of 34.9%. Sumitra Naidu reports.
For years, South Africa has been battling to stem unemployment from rising. COVID-19 has added to the country's woes.
The number of not economically active increased by 988,000 people between the two quarters, of which the discouraged work seekers took a larger chunk. Trade, community and social services, as well as construction, recorded the highest employment losses. Trade having lost 309,000 jobs. Community and social services having lost 210,000 jobs. And construction having lost 65,000 jobs.
The impacts of the civil unrest in July was included in the latest data. Thousands lost their jobs after hundreds of businesses in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal were destroyed. The looting and damages cost the economy $3.4 billion. Young people are the worst affected. Those aged 15 to 24 years and 25 to 34 years recorded the highest unemployment rates of 66.5% and 43.8% respectively.
We are seeing that not only are young people unemployed and not able to get any economic activity, and neither are they in education. It says the kind of higher education degrees that South Africa produces do not necessarily meet the demand of the labor market or what the kind of jobs that are out there.
On the upside, the finance sector continued to show resilience, adding a quarterly increase of 138,000 jobs. But the rest of the formal sector lost 571,000 jobs.
The problem has always been the fact that we have micro and macroeconomic policies that are unable to reduce the unemployment rate. The measures that were put in place as a response to COVID have had quite a negative impact on the economy.
Various attempts to boost job creation have either failed or are making very slow progress. South Africa's unemployment was at 25% in 2011. This rate has risen 10% in the last decade. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
While staying in South Africa, drivers in the country are now paying 75 cents a litre more for petrol in the local rand currency and between 72.5 and 74.5 cents a litre more for diesel. That's compared to last month. Consumer bodies are now calling for more transparency around components that make up the price of fuel. Here's Angela Coppola with more.
The country's fuel price has been increasing steadily for most of 2021.
Our petrol has increased by 40% since December 2020. Our diesel by around 44% since 2020. And I think most concerning, the price of illuminating paraffin has gone up by 70% since 2020. And we know that wages and salaries are not keeping pace with these increases.
The impact on the country's economy will be massive.
At the end of the day, this will, of course, naturally follow through onto our inflation prints, which is still a major concern at this point. Luckily, in South Africa, we've been more protected from surging inflation as we've seen across the world, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere. But with such high level of fuel pump prices, that will naturally start to follow suit, and we will see higher inflations for the prints for the month of November and December.
Questions have been raised about the transparency of fuel prices and how they are calculated. And then there's the poor state of two of the country's 3 refineries and whether they could mitigate the monthly price swings.
Let's have a look at all the components and the processes that go into determining the price of a litre of fuel. And let's put that on the table and make that a transparent process. Could the issue with refineries mitigate against rising costs? Let's have that conversation.
The government has to balance very carefully what it does when it comes to the fuel price and levies it imposes.
It's a very much a catch-22 as to what government can do. Do they look more after the South African consumer, or do they focus more on the South African fiscus and the longer-term game?
Motorists got a huge shock when they found out what they would be paying for fuel for the month of December, and it's unlikely to come down in January either. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, the world has been battling a growing energy crisis, the likes of which has not been seen since the 1970s. Egypt has been encouraging citizens to convert their cars to run on natural gas instead of petrol. It's also promoting electric vehicles. CGTN's Yasser Hakim looks at the government's plans from the point of view of transport service drivers.
Egypt has been aggressively working for 5 years to introduce renewable energy in the auto industry. It is producing the first locally assembled electric car in the country in cooperation with China's Dongfeng. And electric buses are roaming the streets as the latest addition to its public transport services.
We as public service drivers are used to working in the toughest conditions and on vehicles in a dire state. We have to adapt to it, so I am happy working on a cost-efficient vehicle that provides good service to the people. One that is fast, with a strong and durable engine. There is no pollution from the bus, nearly zero emissions.
Most efforts are geared towards natural gas. The government had launched a huge campaign to encourage Egyptians to convert from fuel to much cheaper and eco-friendly natural gas-powered vehicles. One of those who responded is taxi driver Hani Hassan.
I converted my car 5 years ago. My colleagues worked on natural gas cars and they told me it is good and efficient. I said I will try. So I did install it and it's doing well. For example, 100 Egyptian pounds of fuel would last about 120 kilometers distance. I now pay 30 or 40 Egyptian pounds on gas to run the same distance. Gas is better than fuel.
Hassan says the government has been providing incentives for those who join in.
The gas company has been very decent and professional in their services. They do the maintenance and check on the car regularly for free, and I was offered to pay for the conversion costs in installments, which I do, and everything is fine.
Less cost means more income for Hassan. The North African nation is focusing on natural gas for vehicles because of the huge reserves it maintains after large discoveries in the Mediterranean Sea. This has allowed the government to expand the scheme.
There is more incentive for us after the government increased the number of gas stations everywhere. Before, it was hard to find gas stations. Now there are many and we can't complain of any shortage.
Converting to natural gas-powered vehicles has also shielded owners like Hassan from the latest global energy crisis, which has forced the government to increase fuel prices twice in a couple of months. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
You are watching Africa Live. Your sports news up next. Coming up, African teams in a perfect start at the 2021 FIFA Arab Cup in